Can you hear me? Is this too loud? Okay. First, I'm Catherine Perrin. I'm the president of the diocesan ECW. My husband asked me if I had holes in my head, and I said, well, you know I do. But anyway, before we start, I didn't want to interrupt Sarah's program, but I just wanted to go over a couple of things because you're a captive audience, and I like captive audiences. Our next gathering is on May 5th at St. Martin's. It's our spring meeting. It's our annual spring meeting, and the speaker is Dr. Mark Biddle, and he is just an engaging man. He's this down-home Alabama man who is erudite as whatever, and is always interesting, and he is going to demystify the Bible for us. And if anybody can do it, he can do it. And I just would like you to put that down on your calendar. And the other thing that we have on the calendar is the 26th of September. We're having an afternoon tea at the Church of the Epiphany, and that's a Saturday, and this would be the third year that we've done it, and it's a lot of fun, and that's just sheer fun. Nobody's gonna try to educate you. What? Oh, right. The reason for it is that it supports our gifts and scholarship, which we give every year to it's right back there. To students who are pursuing a higher education, but it doesn't necessarily mean college. It means junior college, technical schools, whatever. And we don't give, the amount we give depends on how much we collect. So that's sort of what it is, but it's a good sort of things. And also, if you take that back to your churches and let them know that there is scholarship from the Episcopal Church women, and all of the information for that is on our website, which you may or may not know, and I'm going to tell you what it is because it's really easy. It's ecwvirginia.org. How hard is that? It's not. So it's new, and we try to keep it up to date. And that's all. I just wanted to get that business stuff out of the way before we become Lenten. Thank you. Now you can talk. Pardon me? The annual meeting date is the 17th of October. We have a wonderful speaker. The only thing we don't have at the moment is a wonderful church. We're still looking for a wonderful church. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a tent thing, you know. I wear hearing aids, and I don't know if you heard that, but I've got to turn my phone off so that I don't get this in the middle of it. It gives me all my messages, which is really helpful, but it really interrupts my train of thought. So our speaker for the annual meeting is Lisa Kimball, who spoke at convention, and I was so impressed. I said, I want that person to come and speak to us. So it is something that you shouldn't miss, but we don't have a church yet. So if you have a church that you'd like to volunteer, there's always that. But we have the date and the speaker. The date is based on what the speaker wants, so that's it. Have at it. That's the end of my message.
Good. I'm Kay Holmes. I'm a member here at Christ Church, and we're really excited to have everybody here, even though it's kind of a nasty day. What else are you going to do but be with your friends? Probably too late now, but restrooms are over here as you come in, and there's plenty of food out on the table. Help yourselves. If you need more coffee, whatever. And I get to introduce our speaker. So, and first of all, the Reverend Drew Downey is in charge today. Yeah. He's our sort of new assistant rector, and he's doing great. This is Adam Williams. He is, what's your title now? Minister to Families, doing a fabulous job, taking care of the coffee back there. And so now I get to, is that all the housekeeping we need? Okay. To introduce our speaker, the Reverend Dr. Sarah Kai Price, who says, please just call me Sarah, is the Vocations Minister for the Diocese of Virginia. In her diocesan role, she oversees the diocesan discernment process for both lay and ordained ministry, as well as shepherds the canonical ordination process for those preparing for ministry as deacons and priests. On Sundays, you can find her at one of our many diocesan parishes talking about discernment and vocation, or at St. Mark's, Richmond, where she is the priest affiliate. Sarah is a blended vocational social worker, professor, priest, who previously served on the full-time faculty at VCU School of Social Work and currently serves as distinguished career professor at VCU and the St. Margaret's visiting professor of women in ministry with Church Divinity School of the Pacific and their hybrid MDiv program. Does anyone else feel inadequate? Sarah lives in Richmond with her husband Michael and has an adult daughter, Cassandra, who is a social worker in training and the nursery and child care provider at St. Mark's. In addition to engaging the vocational work she loves, Sarah is learning and practicing the sacred art of iconography. She also loves music of all kinds, especially choral singing. My honor to introduce Sarah Kai Price.
Thank you all. It's such a joy to be here today. I hate titles. My favorite one is the one that I got at baptism. So please call me Sarah. That is how we all relate to each other in this world, even if we do many things. Some of you if you came in early and you watched me buzzing around, my daughter sometimes says when I'm in that mode, it's like the flight of the bumblebees. You know, I got to get things set up. I like to do many things, but also our life is one thing. Our life is a ministry of prayer and worship, all of us, irrespective of all the things that we do in this world. So when I was asked and invited to be able to be here today with all of you. And I was asked, like, what would you speak on? I thought of this title that I'm calling Hallowing Our Days. Now, we usually say that word at least once a week, maybe more often than that, right? In the very familiar Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. And we're going to talk about that because what I want to talk about is making our days holy. Through all the ways and things, both the busyness of our hands as well as the prayers of our hearts and minds, that let us live into the holiness that God intends for us in all of our lives. So that is my hope today. You can see that there are many things on the tables in front of you. All shall be revealed. There is also an agenda for those of you who are linear and like to know what's coming. It says that we're going to talk together for about an hour, and then I'm going to set you free into practicing some of the things that we talk about during that hour, just for about half an hour, just to try out maybe one or two things that you haven't done before or that you have and want to do again. And then we're going to regather and be at the Lord's table and celebrate Holy Eucharist together. And in that great Thanksgiving, bring the joys of our lives into this space. And then we're going to have lunch, and I'm going to stick around, and the stuff will still be on the tables. So if you didn't finish something or want to try something new, we'll be around till around 2 o'clock to let you keep practicing or keep trying out some of these things that we'll talk about today. So that is the scope of the day that we have together. But before we go into that anymore, we want to do the important thing. We want to pray. This being one of my favorite prayers in the prayer book. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. O God of peace, who has taught us that in returning and rest we shall be saved, in quietness and confidence shall be our strength. By the might of your Spirit, lift us, we pray, to your presence, where we may be still and know that you are God. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. That's what the schedule looks like visually for those of you who like a visual. Let me get us centered in a place where we come to this particular word. This word, hallow, it's not something we use in everyday conversation other than saying the Lord's Prayer. We don't walk through Kroger being like, have a hallowed day, right? Maybe on Halloween we sneak it in there, you know, but it tends to get an association with tricks and treats. But it's an old word, and it's a word that situates in our Anglican Episcopal identity. In the Old English, Halgian, to make holy, to sanctify, to honor as holy, to consecrate, to ordain. Those are big words. I get to sit with those words every day because I work with people who are thinking about what that means in their life. Sometimes filled with joy and awe, sometimes with terror and reservation. That idea of being ordained and consecrated, it feels big, and it is big. It's because it belongs to God. It's big and it's overwhelming to think of our lives as ordained and consecrated if we think that we alone are responsible for being all things in all situations. We can't do that. But those of us who have taken vows of baptism and who have held in our arms little ones for whom we're speaking on behalf as they enter the family of God, know that they are also being ordained and consecrated, set apart, christened, brought into Christ. That is what we all do, what our hope is for each other and our hope for ourselves. As we live and move through the world, we sometimes move apart from this, and we start to think about holy spaces and the rest of the time, Sunday and the rest of the week, churches and the world. But God's loving plan for all of God's people is to be in the holiness of God's creation. And so it's our opportunity, our gift from God, to have a doorway that opens at any time, whenever it is, when we're able to allow the holy to permeate our lives. Now, let me tell you, sometimes that looks beautiful, and I hope to talk about some beautiful ways. And sometimes it looks a little bit like, I was thinking about this in the car this morning as I was driving here. Sometimes it looks a little bit like maybe what I did in the middle of the COVID pandemic at one point in time. Now, I do like to do a lot of things. I like my days to be full, makes life interesting, but I was doing a few too many things. I was kind of getting up in the morning and doing all the things, and I was at VCU full time, and I was at St. Mark's and helping us live into a virtual way of worshiping together, and I was starting up St. Phoebe's School for Deacons, and there were a lot of things. And I was working one day, it was a Friday, because Friday night is pizza night in our family. And so I was working, I had gotten up and I was working. I don't think I ever stopped working. I probably worked right through lunch, and my daughter finally kind of came into the room where I was working and said, are we gonna have dinner? and all of a sudden I realized it was, 6 o'clock, and I was like, oh, I got out my Domino's app and I ordered some pizza, and I got in my car to go pick up my contactless delivery. And I live in Ginter Park, so some of you who know that area, I'm driving down Dumbarton Road, and I am just screaming at God, I can't do all these things. The windows are up, the radio's on, nobody can hear me, so I'm having a little bit of prayer time with God, kind of like David did in the Psalms, right? I'm like, I don't know how I can do all these things. I'm working so hard, and I'm so exhausted all the time, and I can't even remember to get dinner for my family, and I'm just like letting it all out. And I said, why did you ask me to do all these things? And this is one of 2 times in my life when I believe that I viscerally heard the voice of God. And what I heard was, I didn't ask you to do all the things. And I stopped. I actually pulled off the side of the road before I got to the pizza place and cried. Because I knew it was true. Because we get ourselves in these places, in these spaces where we think that doing all the things that could possibly come our way is the way that we're supposed to be living this life. And many of us have many things we have to do and many things we're responsible for. But what God wants is us in relationship. And I knew that in that moment. So my tears were both tears of, I can't believe I forgot that thing. But they were also like a giant hug. A reminder that God is always there and present, not as a chiding person or a to-do list manager, but as someone who's there to hold me, to help me know what's truly important, to help me set aside things when they're not. Because one of the things that had kind of gone by the wayside was that. my daily rhythm of just being in connection with God. And God desires that of us. So I tell on myself so that we can all be in the same place together. Some of us have really deep and abiding prayer practices, and some of us do the best we can, and all of us are beloved. And so God is inviting that relationship not for us to do better, because God can't wait to see us. God can't wait for those moments where we create a space of holiness in our day and in our life so that we get to be in that embrace together. That's what it is to love someone. And God is desiring that of us. So I invite you today into this conversation where we talk about some ways to invite holiness, to invite hallowing, making holy the ordinary of our lives. And we engage in some practice in that together. How many of you have heard of a thin space? We use that term sometimes, right? I want you to just draw in your mind, into your mind a time where you felt like there's a thin space, like maybe you're outside, maybe you're in nature, maybe you're in a cathedral, maybe you're in church, maybe you're singing in choir, wherever it may be. A thin space where it seems like there's very little distance between the world that we're inhabiting here and the world that God has created for us. I have some pictures here of moments where I was in a thin space, looking out across the San Francisco Bay, and one of them is a monastery where I do some retreating, and the lilacs were just, I wish you could smell that picture of those lilacs in absolute full bloom, and it felt like I was just wrapped in all my senses. But maybe you have a place, a space, a time where you felt that thin space. I think we're given those thin spaces. Those moments are there so that we can draw them back into our mind. I might not have the lilacs with me at that monastery garden, but I can close my eyes and I can return to them, and I can remember with my mind, and I can re-experience with my senses some of what it was like to be in that thin space. So the first thing that I invite you to do is to think about those spaces. Name those spaces. In the story of the Transfiguration, we are up on the mountain with Jesus, and we have beloved Peter who says, "This is a good place. Let's build a tent and stay here," right? And we know, Jesus knows we can't stay here. We know that we can't always stay in the thin places, but they're a part of us. They've planted into our hearts. They give us a space for us to go back to and experience God's nearness. So I invite you to think about those thin spaces and what you felt in them, even as we deepen into this conversation today. I'd like to talk about 3 spaces, which may apply to various people in this room in different ways, but I'm going to talk about them all because I think that they're important. And one is the space of our homes, the place where we make our everyday being. And then we also have the place that is our work or our office or our school. And that may be a place that for you spend, for me, I spend, maybe more time in than I even see my family. And even if you are in a place in your life where work office, school is not a place that you have, you certainly have people that you know and love who spend lots of time in those spaces too. And we tend to think of those as other spaces, like not home and not holy. Maybe that's even true for those of us who work for the church. We can get very caught up in that, right? So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about the space that is us, ourselves. We move through the world. We interact with people. Every day, we get up and we put on clothes and we maybe put on some jewelry or maybe put on something that reminds us, that has significance and meaning. So the way in which we ourselves are a sacred space matters. When we're home, we can think about where we pray. What are the places in our house that recenter us? What are we seeing when we first wake up in the morning? Do we notice when we move from one room to another and its different functions and the way that those provide for us and for the people around us? Have we embraced some of the individual and family prayers that are in our Book of Common Prayer? A whole section. Now, you're the ECW, so this is probably second nature to you. But when I run discernment retreats and I introduce people and I have them open up the Book of Common Prayer to page 814, and they find that there is not just Sunday prayers there, but there are prayers for individuals and families to use throughout the day. Some of my beloved Episcopal siblings are shocked to find that. And then there's also the depth of the prayers that are contained, not only individual and family prayers, but then prayers for all these different occasions that are in the prayer book too. It's a treasure trove of resources. So if it's been a little while since you opened up and explored, I encourage you to do that. My home has not always felt like the holiest place. I'm getting better at that. Maybe it's because, when you're raising young children, it just feels like a messy place all the time. At least mine does, right? Sometimes it feels like a place where I do a lot of work, or I always feel guilty about, like, it should be neater, it should be tidier, it should be this, I should fix that, I should do that. That's getting distracted from the heart of the fact that we are housed. There are a lot of people who aren't housed. That we have a place where we can hold our beloved people and possessions. And some of those things in your home, as in my home, some of those things are filled with memories. To a fault, we're probably the junk collectors of our families, my husband and I. Everyone who has moved and has a cast-off thing that they don't want, that's our furniture. Not because it's necessarily, because we love it, because it has memories. It's like that's Laverne's dining room table, and that's, Grandma's dining hutch, and that's like they have this memory, right? And I look at the things that I have, and they remind me of my beloveds in the world. And on a daily basis, I could forget about that and just get caught up in the doing of the things. But it's an invitation in to honor our homes. Our workspaces, we can be more deliberate with them, perhaps. And maybe in your home you have a particular place that's a workspace or some place you visit. We're going to talk about some things to do with that as well. I want to give us some scaffolding to work with. And what I want to talk about before I give some specifics about what we might do are the ways in which history has given us some lessons about how we might welcome more wholly into our spaces, into our homes, into our work, into our persons. So you may know, and maybe we see this more at certain times of year, home altars, or in a culture sometimes of our Spanish and Latino siblings, ofrendas. We see those around Halloween, and we see people with setup of, family photos and memorials, and we think about that. But the altars that we have, the altars in our churches are not the only holy spaces. We started talking during the pandemic a little bit about having a home altar. That was something that we talked about in some of our calls, and our bishops talked about that, and we even posted some pictures about that on Facebook. I remember that at the time. And at the time, I had never done that. I was a priest. I had never done that. I always had my holy spaces were not in my house, like I said. I think I struggled with that a lot. And so I took that to heart. And I started thinking about, what would be a place? So I have a place where I do work from home. It's not a fancy office. It's the former guest room. That kind of is the overflow room for wrapping paper and, clothes and all of that. It's not a glamorous place. And I was like, yeah, I know I work in here, and it's not real glamorous. It's functional. I can set up a computer and work, but I thought, what if? Just what if? And so I found a place that was there that was a nice flat place between two dressers. It was an old cedar chest that I had. And I found a really pretty scarf that I didn't need to wear all the time, and I laid it over the top. And we were in the pandemic, so I thought, I don't really want to go out and get flowers. I wonder what's in my yard. And I had these two little tiny bud vases. So I walked in my yard, and I just cut a bunch of stuff. Some greens, some flowers, some trees, some things, and all of a sudden, it was really pretty. I was kind of amazed. I had this set of carved praying hands that was from my great aunt. She was someone who was a prayer warrior, is the term that she used to use. And before she died, when I was pretty small, probably around 11 or 12, she gave me those praying hands, and I've always had them sitting up on a bookshelf, and I thought, I think those need to be more front and center. I think maybe Great Aunt Edna, who prayed without ceasing, probably has some gifts to offer me as part of my great cloud of witnesses. And then I found an icon of the Holy Trinity that was meaningful. I made some prayer beads. I put things together. And it became the place that I looked at every morning before I started work. Every Sunday during almost 2 years where we were not worshiping in community, in person, I went for a walk and found flowers in my yard, in the neighborhood, in cast-off fields. Sometimes they were blackberry briars. Sometimes they were all kinds of things. And you know what? It was always beautiful. There was always something that God was providing in creation, even in the middle of winter. And sometimes I found things growing in my yard I didn't even know were growing in my yard. It's pretty incredible. This practice of creating a holy space where we bring together creation and we bring together the objects that are drawing us is a way to focus our attention. It doesn't have to be a grandiose project. It can be the small corner that's carved out that you allow yourself to gaze on, to bring the holy in, and to wrap your heart and your mind around the love of God that's present. So that has been a custom going on for ages, and I offer you that. I'm actually going to pull ahead and then go back. Some ways to bring that together. Sacred images, sacred objects, poems and prayers, lights, could be candles or lamps, seasonal offerings, and borrowing from our Orthodox siblings who say, I asked an Orthodox the monastery that I attend is by Orthodox brothers, and I said, are there blessings for particular things? Blessings for some of the objects that they used or for some of the icons? And Brother Christopher said to me, and it helped explain to me the Orthodox practice, that in using, things are blessed. Blessing is not something that comes externally down, but things are blessed by use. So icons are blessed because every time the Orthodox enter, they acknowledge them, kiss them, touch them. The use, the actual using is what makes something blessed. And that imprinted on me. I think that there's a lesson in that for us, in how being blessed by use is the way in which we can welcome some of that holiness into our lives. We don't talk a lot in the Episcopal Church about relics and reliquaries, but the historic practice was that reliquaries were a place where some piece of a saint's life or body, in some cases, was held. Sometimes they were held in churches. Sometimes people had them. Sometimes people would go on pilgrimage and carry a relic with them. Why is that? Was it just because people were like really, attached to that particular object? No, it was because it was a thought that holy and sacred things continue to be holy and sacred things as they spread in use. Now, we might not have a reliquary in that traditional sense, but those items that carry with us, the praying hands that were my great aunts, they're sort of a contemporary reliquary, right? They carry some of her spirit, some of the prayer that was part of her life. Where are the things? Where are the relics of that which is holy for you? One of the things that I do when I visit the thin places in my life is that I may bring something home with me. And sometimes they find me, or if I have a moment where I'm praying outdoors, maybe it's a pine cone, maybe it's some leaves, maybe it is a rock, maybe it is something that reminds me and helps me focus on that space. There's something important about having an object that we hold in our hands sometimes. Tear jars, not something we use today, but historically in ancient Rome, small, beautiful little bottles, lachrymatory bottles, they were little glass bottles, were part of both home and carried on person, especially for people when they were grieving or going through a difficult time in their life. They were actually ways in which to hold and to recognize tears as holy. Imagine that. We're in a place where tears get wiped away, or we're told don't cry. But in our history, there is a reverence for the holiness of tears, held as a gift, because tears reflect that depth of emotion, that depth of love. And we might not have an exact tear bottle, but what do we have that can hold and reflect our emotions? Prayer beads and devotional jewelry, they're part of so many traditions, and they're definitely a part of our Christian tradition in many ways. We're going to talk about Anglican prayer beads, and you see you have some stuff around if you want to experiment with them. But some of us need a tactile thing. Some of us need to have something that we hang on to. Some of us need to have prayers that aren't just in our head, but that are in our hands. That kind of object, having something to hold on to, having something that is part of our devotional witness, that is something that spans the ages for us. So it's something I invite us to think about as well. We talked about the tear jar and the honoring of our emotions. And I think that that's something that I also want to hold up for us as we think together today about what makes life holy. We don't always honor our emotions as holy things. Not all of us are women in this room, but many of us who are women have been called emotional in a not very pleasant way. And I want to name that and see that and say something different to you, which is that emotions are holy. The overflow of emotions in our lives, all of us, are a holy reflection of the depth that we are given in this life. We feel hard sometimes. We feel love, we feel grief, we feel anger, we feel joy, we feel wonder, we feel awe. Our emotions are not something that we are always encouraged to name or express or see as holy. And it's that social worker in me, it's the therapist in me that says, there is not one emotion that isn't holy, because they're all welling up from a depth of who we are. Now, what we do with those feelings matters, because if we don't do something with them, they're still happening. Pretending that they don't exist does not make them go away. And so are there places and spaces in our day where we can actually honor the holiness of our emotions? We could have a note jar where we actually write down what we're feeling and put it in a jar. Pray for it. Hold on to it. Know that it's there. Sometimes I have been filled with a particular emotion and I want to write about it. I want to journal about it. Keeping a journal that's part of my prayer space is also a place where I can just be wholly honest about my feelings and see those feelings as held by God. I do not go back and read my journal. Some people I know even just burn their journals, right? I don't do that. I like to save things. I like them there. Because it's a journey, and I know that all of those experiences are seen and held and heard by God. We can honor them. We can hold them with us and not judge them. There are prayers in our Book of Common Prayer that allow us to express some of those feelings. I guarantee you there is not a psalm in that book of Psalms that doesn't contain some of the human emotions that we're feeling. Pray them. Sometimes I'll write a particular prayer or I'll write a particular emotion and I will fold it up, I will write it on something, I will put it in my pocket and I will hold on to it all day long. Because I know that I want to keep it there. There's a holiness in our emotions. It's like the beautiful jar of tears. So we can honor that, making them sacred. Work can feel tricky for some of us. I've spent the better part of my life not working for the church. I've spent the better part of my life working as a state employee. So this has been a particularly interesting thing for me to come into awareness of. We spent a lot of time in workspaces. And for me, for a long time, I was very protective and feeling like there had to be a separate wall between who I was at home and who I was at work. And then I realized as I walked from office to office that we all have ourselves displayed at work. Family pictures, trophies from things, baseball, football, music, favorite things, trinkets. And I thought, there's no reason for me to not have my most precious things, holy things, part of who I am, that's there as well. Doesn't mean that anyone else has to, they can ask me about it if they want to, but if it grounds me and if it centers me and it helps me remember the wholeness of who I am, that's a holy space. So this has looked like, there's 3 different pictures up there, but they just look like they're one. One was a little tucked away corner where I had some icon prayer cards that were held up. One is my work saint. She's still in my office, St. Frances Perkins. She's my social work saint. That's my work saint commemoration. And the other's a bowl of stones that had the words on them that I needed to remember during the day. I set those in the middle of my table. It was very interesting because students or faculty or colleagues, some people would come in and they would just kind of, I never said, oh, you should take one or you should look at them. They just sat there and all of a sudden they would be like reaching for them and holding them, and because we need it. It was an invitation to other people to recognize the holiness in themselves too. And these are wordless things. This isn't proselytizing who we are. Nobody in a state environment ever had any worries about that, because it was a fullness of bringing our whole selves into a space. Boundaries are important, but wholeness is important too. Knowing what we bring into work, but always being encouraged to be our whole full selves is also a gift to the world in which we live. So those are some pieces of the places that I wanted to talk about. And then I want to talk about some practices. So we're, as you know, it's sometimes said that we are to pray without ceasing. And some of us have an easier time with that than others. But moving into a place where our life is a prayer is a beautiful thing, because our life is lived in God. So these are some practices that extend beyond the formality of prayers and invite us into a depth of practicing the holy around us. Some of you may have heard of Lectio Divina, studying the scriptures, reading the scriptures, following a process of hearing words that may hold meaning for us. But then there's also a process of Visio Divina, thinking about the ways in which particular works of art speak to us. Visio Divina is sacred seeing, allowing an image, a work of art, even nature, to be able to move past our physical senses and connect us with God's presence. When we're practicing Visio Divina, we're thinking about what draws us in. Are we drawn to the whole image or a piece of the image? If we look at an image for a while and we let our gaze soften, what are we seeing? And then if we stay in that place, just in that quiet, seeing whatever we see, whether it's a minute piece or the wholeness, a color, a shape, maybe it's a feeling that's evoked by the image, where is God speaking to us? Holding that silence and letting our minds be clear so that we can hear, maybe it's a word, maybe it's a song, a piece of scripture, a line of poetry. Maybe you think of a particular person or you're drawn back to a particular place. Those are all ways in which we are having a connection with the divine. So I'm going to interrupt my talking, because I've been talking too much, and let us do that for a moment. This is a painting called The Temptation in the Wilderness from Britton Revere in 1898. So I'm going to ask us to take just a minute, just looking at this image. there's something that you notice or something that calls to you from this work. In the depth of your noticing, is there a feeling that you have? Or a word you would use to describe your feeling? Does it call to mind a scripture or a song? Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's so much. It's a simple, beautiful image, but there's so much. And sometimes taking the time to let an image sink in and speak to us. We can get very focused on the way prayer has to look. But this can be a morning meditation or a time before we pause to rest, we let sacred images sink into us. Thank you. Yes. Mm. Mm.
In this stained glass window, it is beyond being beautiful.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, and even in the exercise, it drew you to a place where you know and you see an image that resonates with you. Our stained glass windows, I mean, it is not, as someone who preaches every Sunday, I look at the stained glass windows. It's okay. Like, not everyone's got, God uses more than words, right? I mean, but really the way in which artists convey these images speak to us and are another conduit for the holy.
I always made sure on Sundays, because I used to go to Trinity when I lived in Stanton. I always made sure on Sundays I sat opposite that window so that I could sit there and just look at the beauty, but the compassion and love and gentleness and kindness that was portrayed through that one stained glass window that Louis Comfort Tiffany did.
I love that. Thank you. Some of our spaces have windows to the world. Some of our worship spaces, some of our spaces have windows. Some of our spaces, as I've learned more about icons and iconography, and I want to talk about that for a second because I have some on your tables too. I'm moved by spaces of iconography. I didn't grow up with anything like iconography. In fact, I had a very sort of hostile take on art and icons growing up as in an evangelical family, that they were somehow idolatrous, right? And so whenever I talk about icons, I try to address that directly, because I know if I grew up with a lot of that, probably other people did too. Praying with images is a form of prayer. Praying with images helps us. Any form of prayer that opens us up into an expansive understanding of God is a holy action. So holy texts and holy art are part of what we have. I've given you some contemporary icons and some classic ones on your tables as well. We'll talk about that in a second. And I have a couple examples that I'll show that are done by the people that I'm learning iconography with. The point of an icon is to draw us into focused prayer. If you ever visit an Orthodox church, you'll notice the iconography. It's there actually to help deepen the worship experience. The ways in which icons are manifest are thought of, you can think of them as windows that open us into deeper knowledge and understanding of God's own presence. The character of an icon is not supposed to be realistic. It's not meant to be hyper real like we would have with a photograph. It's meant to actually invite us into some symbolic imagination in the depth in which icons were written or painted, a story of the saint or of that attribute of Christ was actually being revealed. It's a form of prayer to write an icon, even as it is to sit with an icon. So I have two that I wanted to show you. That are seasonal. This is the foot washing. This is an icon by Philip Davidov, who's one of my iconography teachers. This is more contemporary icon of that's after in the same spirit of a traditional icon. He poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel. What do you notice in this rendering? Right, it's like, this is blowing my mind. How can this be, right?
What also, to me, is when one of the disciples says, "Wash my feet, wash my head also."
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Yes. Also my head and my hand. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I see some of that same tenderness that you mentioned in the window of the way in which foot is held and touched. Yeah, the basin. Yeah, holding that symbolism of being like the world. That's all. It says he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel.
I like that rather than looking down at what he's doing, it looks like he's looking in the disciples' eyes.
Yes. There's an eye to eye. Yeah, the focus is not on the feet. The focus is on the relationship, right? Meeting his eye to eye.
I, of course, am always pretty irreverent.
Can't hear you.
What?
Catherine said she's pretty irreverent, so yeah.
So when I look at that, I sort of see a porthole with him putting his foot through the porthole.
Ah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
One foot in one life.
One foot in one world, one foot in the other. There are so many things that we bring into this, right? And it makes us wonder. It invites our imagination. It invites our prayerfulness.
Sarah,
Yes.
a couple of things I'm wondering about. What distinguishes an icon from another painting of a holy moment?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, are there any contemporary artists focusing on female figures and icons?
I appreciate both questions. So the first question was, what separates an icon from another work of art? And I would say that the writing or painting of an icon is with a deliberate symbolic intention. And it's meant to be not realistic. So when I'm learning, for example, to paint an icon, it's not to bring as much realism into the face as possible. It's to make it real enough that it draws the person in, but also not telling the whole story, because the goal of the icon is to be a story conveyance tool, to be a prayer form, to help someone go deeper. So in religious traditions that have used iconography, it's used expressly as religious art and made for the purposes of conveying a depth of prayer and of religious life. So not just an artist's imagination, in other words, but building on a tradition and a foundation. What I'm learning from doing iconography, from actually engaging the art of iconography, is the many, I'm learning to paint in egg tempera, which is a traditional method, and so many layers. So many layers. And every one of them a prayer. We start all of our practices with prayer. I'm painting, I'm watching layer by layer. Sometimes I'm painting layers that are so thin, I think that they're transparent. And there's just this slow build up of the minerals that are held in the egg, right? There's an earthiness to it. These are ground up, plants and rocks that are just, color is emerging from them as they're mixed with egg and water. It reminds me all the time of the same way that we bring Eucharistic gifts to be filled with the holy, these common elements being filled with the holy. So there's a lot of that in the practice. I have some contemporary icons from Kelly Lattimore on your table. So that's the iconographer on the printed out icons. Some of you have one or two. One is of the crucifixion and one is of Christ in the desert. And Kelly's rendition of those, I think, is really beautiful. Also has, in the whole collection of Kelly Lattimore's work, there are a number of images of women. The next icon that I'm going to show here, this is from Olga Shalamova. It's a married couple that I'm learning iconography from. They're Russian Orthodox, living in Georgia, Republic of Georgia. And this is Christ appearing to the holy women. And so there are also depictions of many women in different ways. The holy myrrh bearers, the first witnesses to the resurrection, are depicted here. But I know that there are some iconographers who are really looking at particularly women in art. So we can talk about that, but there are one of the things that I love about the iconography that work in the Orthodox tradition even is that there are several women who have the status that I think they deserve. So Mary Magdalene is considered to be the apostle to the apostles. In the iconography of the Orthodox Church, Mary Magdalene has a place of prominence. Like, she was the first evangelist, and so some of those depictions are very strong. There are many depictions as well of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and in different ways that are quite striking and strong. There's one, I don't have it with me. There's a medieval icon that actually shows Mary, Mother of God, trampling down the devil. I can't wait to paint that one. I think there's something about that speaks to me. That convey different attributes, right? They're not all passive attributes, they're active. And the way that I've been taught to embody this is that we learn about the life of the person and we imbue the prayers that we have about those attributes for ourselves, for others who may view on them. We're always praying for those who may view and pray with this art, as well as for those of us who are creating it. Just a couple things, because then I want to set you free to do some exploratory work. I want to talk about single word centering prayer. This is something that, I don't know if it's an official thing, it's a thing that I do, so I'm going to talk about it, because I think it's something I can do on any given day at any given time. Which is that I may start my day with let's say it's morning prayer or some scripture reading or even some quiet prayer, and I will have one word that I just write down on a sheet of paper and I put it in my pocket or I carry it with me. At any time during the day when my thoughts start to get all wound up as they do, that is the word that I will turn to. I have found this practice to be so helpful to me. So one of the things that's on your tables, I scattered some words around. You can go from table to table too, but maybe that'll be a practice you want to think about as well. It can also be a prayer bead practice, because if you're someone who carries Anglican prayer beads, that is a great way to use as a touchstone and have your word. Maybe it's a word you always use or you use for a season, or a word for a particular day. We're going to do some singing together at Eucharist, but I want to say that some of the chants that we use are ways of carrying a prayer as well. Chants and hymns, things that are stuck in our head, become part of what becomes a wordless prayer. Maybe it's a strain of Ubi Caritas, which is, we'll sing that a little bit later, but thinking about God's love, thinking about God's nearness. And last but not least, I mentioned those prayer beads, and I have some things around on your tables. Maybe you have made Anglican prayer beads. Maybe you have not. I have some that are already made if you want to try praying with them. On your tables, there's how to make them, and there are various beads scattered around that you could try to bring together and make yourself a set of prayer beads. I'm around to help with that if you'd like to try. Or if you already have a set of prayer beads or you want to borrow one of mine, there are also some prayers that you can use with the prayer beads that are more formal and structured. You can also do some unstructured prayers. You could just use the beads to pray for different people in your life. Or you can have some, that single word prayer that whenever you reach in to your pocket and touch your prayer beads, or whenever you look at them, every bead you touch is a repetition of that word that brings you back to the center. This is also a tactile way of bringing prayer into our daily life. And because we're in this beautiful space with this beautiful labyrinth, maybe you noticed when you came in, maybe you did not, but there is a beautiful labyrinth just behind us. And walking the labyrinth is a prayer practice. It's actually a journeying practice that helps us remember and focus on taking one step, then the other. It's a journey to the center. And then the center being a place where we recognize God's nearness. We put the font in the center. We can even remember our baptism and pray a blessing, pray our prayers. And then as we leave the labyrinth, walking out, not just crossing over, but taking the journey through the labyrinth again, the journey out of the labyrinth, opening our minds to what God may put in our hearts as a prayer, as a song, as a gift for the next part of our journey. For those of you who don't want to physically walk the labyrinth, I have printed out a tracing labyrinth. There are a couple on each table. And I like to have these around. Sometimes I need to take a little journey in the middle of the day, and I can take that journey with my finger. I know that there are fancy, nice, molded, ceramic ones. Also, a printed one works just as well. And you can actually have a labyrinth that helps you make a journey. Hold your prayer, reach the center, give thanks to God. Journey back out of the labyrinth, letting that go so that you can take the next steps of your day. Again, a prayer practice that can be integrated just into the everyday routine. So that is all that I want to say at this point in time, although I'm still around and I can ask your questions about things. I have put things on your tables so that you can be creative. Maybe you want to explore one of the things that we just talked about. Maybe you want to spend some time with one of the images that's there, or some of you have a physical icon on your table. There are beads of different sizes and formats. There's some wire, there's some string, there's some words. You can put them together. It doesn't have to be perfect or fancy. But what will you do in this next half an hour-ish, 25 minutes-ish, to just practice one of these prayer practices that we talked about? And if you would like me to pull up one of the images up here on the screens, I can do that too, if you want to take a look at that. But we're going to just let you explore and practice. There's some dried flowers and things. You may, I have glue dots. I have glue dots and scissors and things that you might need like that over on the side. I also have some prayer beads over here if some of you want to borrow a set and try to pray. So come and find me for that. Yes.